March 15, 1943. Somewhere over the Pacific, Squadron Leader Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the radio waves, barely audible above the static and engine noise. "Control Tower, this is Eagle Squadron. We've got 18 Zeros closing in. From the northwest. Fuel's running low, visibility's near zero, and Henderson's already taken a hit to his port wing." Back at the base, 22-year-old Sarah Chen sat hunched over her radio equipment in a cramped communications bunker, her headset pressed tight against her ears. Around her, seasoned operators with years of experience were handling routine transmissions. Sarah had been assigned the night shift, the quiet hours when nothing important ever happened. She was the rookie, the girl from San Francisco who'd learned radio operation from her ham operator father, not from military training. But tonight, she was the only voice standing between 12 American pilots and certain death. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." 3 months earlier, Sarah Chun had stepped off the transport truck at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, clutching her single duffel bag and trying not to show how intimidated she felt. The Pacific Theater was no place for someone who'd spent her life in her father's electronics shop in Chinatown, learning circuits and frequencies between customers, buying vacuum tubes and radio parts the other radio operators barely acknowledged. Her arrival. There was Tommy Rodriguez, a former commercial radio man from Texas who could identify aircraft by engine sound alone. Bill Harrison had operated ship-to-shore communications for the Merchant Marine before the war and knew every protocol by heart. These men had credentials, experience, and respect. Sarah had enthusiasm and a talent for hearing things others missed, a skill that seemed worthless in a world where following procedures mattered more than intuition. Her first weeks at Henderson Field were a study in military hierarchy and casual dismissal. While Rodriguez and Harrison handled the crucial daytime communications with bombing runs and reconnaissance flights, Sarah found herself assigned to the graveyard shift, midnight to 8 a.m., when radio traffic consisted mainly of weather reports and routine position checks from patrol flights. "It's perfect for you, Chun," Staff Sergeant Walter Briggs had told her with a patronizing smile. "Nice and quiet. Nothing that requires real experience." The bunker where Sarah worked was a concrete and steel box buried 6 feet underground, lined with radio equipment that hummed and crackled constantly. Banks of receivers and transmitters covered every wall, their dials glowing amber in the dim light. The air smelled of cigarette smoke, coffee, and the ozone scent of electrical equipment running hot. During those long night hours, Sarah discovered something her colleagues had missed. The radio waves carried more than just official transmissions. Late at night, when atmospheric conditions were just right, she could pick up fragments of enemy communications. Her father had taught her enough Japanese from their neighbors in San Francisco that she could understand pieces of what she heard: patrol schedules, fuel concerns, equipment problems. Sarah started keeping notes, documenting patterns in enemy radio traffic. When she tried to share her observations with Sergeant Briggs, he barely glanced at her carefully written reports. "Stick to your assigned duties, Chun. We've got intelligence specialists for enemy communications." But Sarah kept listening, kept learning. She began to recognize individual voices among the American pilots, learning their call signs, their flying patterns, their personalities transmitted through static-filled conversations. Jake Morrison flew with a calculated precision that came through in his clipped radio discipline. His wingman, Danny Walsh from Oklahoma, had a nervous energy that made him chatter too much over the radio until Morrison would cut him off with a gentle, "Keep it tight, Walsh." There was Tommy Liu, no relation, despite the shared surname, a Chinese-American pilot from Seattle who flew reconnaissance missions and always checked in exactly on schedule. Rebecca Martinez flew one of the few transport planes, ferrying Supplies and personnel with a competence that brooked no argument from ground control. Through hundreds of hours of radio contact, these voices became familiar, almost friendly. Sarah found herself worried when someone was overdue, relieved when a pilot reported safe landing after a difficult mission. Her colleagues saw these pilots as call signs and tactical information. Sarah began to see them as people whose lives depended on clear communication and quick thinking. The night everything changed started like any other. Sarah had arrived for her midnight shift to find the day operators finishing up routine reports. Harrison nodded briefly in her direction, the closest thing to acknowledgement she usually received, while Rodriguez was already packing up his gear. "Quiet night," Rodriguez mentioned to Harrison. "Most of the squadrons are grounded for maintenance. Just got Eagle Squadron out on a long-range patrol. Won't be back until dawn." Sarah settled into her station, adjusting her headset and running through the standard equipment checks her father had drilled into her. Radio operation was about more than just talking. It was about listening to the silence between words, understanding what the static and interference might be hiding. The first few hours passed normally. Routine position reports from Eagle Squadron, weather updates from the meteorology station, periodic check-ins from the radar operators scanning for enemy aircraft. But around 3 a.m., something changed in the radio waves. Sarah noticed it first as a subtle shift in the background static, a rhythmic pattern that didn't match normal atmospheric interference. She fine-tuned her receiver, adjusting frequencies with the delicate touch her father had taught her. There. It was Japanese radio chatter, much stronger than usual. Multiple voices, urgent tones, coordinate references that made Sarah's blood run cold as she translated the fragments she could understand. Large formation of enemy fighters was gathering, preparing for what sounded like a major intercept mission. And based on the coordinates they were discussing, Eagle Squadron was flying directly into their path. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the communication log to record her observations. Standard procedure required her to document any potential enemy intelligence and forward it through proper channels. But proper channels meant waking up the intelligence officer, who would need to verify the translation, consult with higher command, and eventually, maybe get word to the pilots who were already in the air. The process could take an hour. Based on what she was hearing, Eagle Squadron had maybe 20 minutes before they flew into the biggest trap of their lives. Jake Morrison's voice crackled through her headset. Calm and professional. "Henderson Control, this is Eagle Leader. Position report. We're at Angels 20, bearing 270, approximately 40 minutes out from base. The weather's getting rough up here, visibility dropping fast." Sarah keyed her microphone, her mouth suddenly dry. She was about to make a decision that would either save 12 lives or end her military career. "Eagle Leader, this is Henderson Control. Be advised, I'm picking up unusual radio activity that may indicate enemy presence in your patrol area." There was a pause, then Morrison's voice, slightly sharper. "Control, can you be more specific? What kind of enemy activity?" Sarah looked around the empty bunker. The senior operators wouldn't be back for hours. The intelligence officer was asleep in his quarters. She was completely alone with a decision that could determine whether Eagle Squadron made it home. "Eagle Leader," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Recommend immediate course change to bearing 310. I've got strong indications of enemy fighters converging on your current flight path." Another pause, longer this time. When Morrison came back on the radio, Sarah could hear the skepticism in his voice. "Henderson Control, I don't show anything on radar. Are you certain about this intelligence?" The Japanese chatter in Sarah's other ear was getting more intense, more urgent. She was running out of time to convince him. "Eagle Leader, I understand your position, but I'm tracking multiple enemy transmissions discussing intercept coordinates that match your current heading. Request you trust my assessment and alter course immediately." What Sarah didn't know was, That 40,000 feet above the Pacific, Jake Morrison was looking at 12 other aircraft, depending on his judgment, flying through weather so thick they could barely see their own wingtips. With fuel gauges already showing the point of no return, and he was being asked to trust the judgment of a radio operator he'd never met, based on intelligence that contradicted everything his instruments were telling him. The static filled the silence as Morrison made his decision. The seconds stretched into eternity as Sarah waited for Morrison's response. In her left ear, the Japanese radio chatter was becoming more frantic. She could make out references to American formation and what sounded like attack coordinates. In her right ear, nothing but the hiss of static from Eagle Squadron. Finally, Morrison's voice cut through. "Henderson Control, Eagle Leader. Against my better judgment, we're altering course to 310. But understand, if this is wrong, we won't have fuel to make it back to base." Sarah's hands were shaking so badly, she could barely hold her pencil to mark the time in her log. "Eagle Leader, course change acknowledged. Maintain a new heading and stand by for further instructions." What she didn't tell Morrison was that she had no idea what those further instructions would be. She was a night shift radio operator who'd been on the job for 3 months, and she just convinced a squadron leader to potentially fly his entire formation into a fuel shortage based on intercepted enemy transmissions that no one else had. Verified. As Eagle Squadron turned northwest, Sarah frantically worked her radio equipment, trying to get a clearer picture of what they were heading into. She switched between frequencies, listening for any additional intelligence that might help. The Japanese transmissions were getting stronger, which meant the enemy formation was definitely moving, but in which direction? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 20 minutes passed. Then Morrison's voice returned, tighter than before. "Henderson Control, Eagle Leader. We've got a problem up here. Danny Walsh is reporting engine trouble. His number 2 engine is running rough, and he's losing oil pressure. We need to consider turning back." Before Sarah could respond, another voice broke through the static, higher-pitched, younger. "Eagle Leader, this is Eagle 3. I can make it back, Skip. Don't turn the whole formation around for me." Sarah recognized Danny Walsh's voice from dozens of previous transmissions. The kid from Oklahoma who always seemed nervous, always talked too much. Now he was trying to sound brave while his engine was failing somewhere over the dark Pacific. "Eagle 3, maintain formation," Morrison ordered. "Henderson Control, what's our best course back to base from our current position?" Sarah was reaching for her navigation charts when her blood froze. The Japanese radio chatter had suddenly stopped completely. After 40 minutes of steady communication, the enemy frequencies had gone dead silent. In her father's electronics shop, he'd taught her that silence could be more important than sound. "When the radio waves go quiet, Shooli," he'd said, using her Chinese name, "that's when you need to listen the hardest." Radio silence meant one thing. The enemy was close enough that they didn't dare transmit and reveal their position. "Eagle Leader, Henderson Control," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "Now, do not return to base on a direct heading. I repeat, do not fly directly. The radio environment has changed. Recommend you take a wide southern loop, bearing 180. Control, that routing will put us dangerously low on fuel. Eagle 3 is already in trouble." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to think. 12 men in the air, one with a failing engine, enemy fighters somewhere in the darkness, and fuel running low. Every decision could be the wrong one. Then she remembered something from her weeks of monitoring routine transmissions. Rebecca Martinez, the transport pilot, had mentioned weather patterns during her supply runs. There were thermal updrafts along the southern approach to Henderson Field, updrafts that could help aircraft conserve fuel by providing natural lift. "Eagle Leader, are you familiar with Pilot Martinez's reports on thermal conditions south of the field?" Henderson Control, now's not the time for weather discussions. Jake. Sarah used his first name without thinking, breaking every radio protocol she'd been taught. The thermals along the southern approach can extend your range. Rebecca Martinez has been using them for weeks to conserve fuel on her supply runs. It's your best chance to get Danny home. There was a long pause. When Morrison came back, his voice had changed subtly, less formal, more human. Henderson Control, you seem to know our operations pretty well for a night shift operator. I listen to everything, Eagle Leader. It's my job. All right, Control. We're trusting your judgment. Coming around bearing 180, descending to catch those thermals you mentioned. As Eagle Squadron changed course again, Sarah found herself in completely uncharted territory. She'd moved beyond radio operation into something closer to air traffic control, but without the training, the authority, or the backup systems. If this went wrong, the responsibility would be entirely hers. The next hour became a masterclass in improvised aviation guidance. Sarah found herself coordinating with other stations she'd never spoken to before, the radar operators in their separate bunker, the weather forecasters, even the fuel depot supervisor to calculate exactly how much reserve Eagle Squadron would need for different approach patterns. Henderson Control, this is Eagle Leader, Morrison reported. We've found those thermals. Danny's engine is still rough, but he's maintaining altitude. We're 40 minutes out from base. That was when the first Japanese fighters appeared on radar. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Johnson burst into Sarah's bunker without ceremony, his radar reports clutched in his hand. Sarah had seen Johnson around the base, a quiet African-American man from Detroit who ran the night radar watch. With methodical precision. "Shun, you need to see this," Johnson said, spreading his radar plots on her desk. "I've got 18 aircraft, formation flying, bearing 090 toward our position. They're not ours." Sarah studied the radar tracks while keeping one ear on the radio frequencies. The enemy formation was flying a perfect intercept course, not toward Henderson Field, but toward the exact point where Eagle Squadron would be in 30 minutes if they maintained their current heading. "Marcus, how long have they been on this heading?" "About 20 minutes. They appeared right after your squadron changed course the second time." The implications hit Sarah like cold water. The Japanese hadn't been planning a random patrol. They'd been tracking Eagle Squadron specifically, waiting for the Americans to commit to a flight path before revealing themselves. Her first course change had disrupted their initial intercept, but they'd adapted quickly. Now they were setting up a new trap. Sarah keyed her microphone. "Eagle Leader, Henderson Control. We have confirmed enemy aircraft on radar, 18 bandits. Bearing 090, approximately 30 minutes from intercept with your current position." Morrison's response was immediate. "Henderson Control, we don't have fuel for evasive maneuvering. If we change course again, Eagle 3 won't make it back." Through her headset, Sarah could hear Danny Walsh's engine getting rougher, the rhythm of his propeller becoming increasingly irregular. The kid was flying a damaged aircraft on fumes, and any deviation from the most direct route home would likely put him in the ocean. "Eagle Leader, maintain current heading," Sarah said, making another decision that could doom them all. "I'm going to try to find you a way through." What Sarah did next would have horrified her supervisors if they'd been awake to see it. She began coordinating directly with other aircraft in the area, bypassing normal command channels and protocols. "Henderson Control to any aircraft, any aircraft. This is an emergency coordination. I need immediate response from any friendly units in Grid Square 77. The response came from an unexpected source. "Henderson Control, this is Marlin Squadron, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Reeves commanding. We're running a training exercise 20 miles north of your position. How can we assist?" Sarah had never heard of Marlin Squadron, But Patricia Reeves' voice carried the authority of someone used to making quick decisions in bad situations. Marlin Leader, I have Eagle Squadron returning with battle damage and enemy fighters converging on their position. Can you provide escort or diversion? Henderson Control. Marlin Squadron consists of 4 training aircraft with limited ammunition. We're not equipped for combat engagement. Marlin Leader, I'm not asking you to fight. I need you to be seen. Can you present an alternative target to draw the enemy formation away from Eagle Squadron's approach? There was a brief pause then. Reeves came back. Henderson Control, that's an unconventional request. Are you authorized to coordinate multi-squadron operations? Sarah looked around her empty bunker, at the radio equipment her father had taught her to operate, at the radar plots showing enemy fighters closing in on 12 American pilots who were running out of fuel and options. Marlin Leader, I'm authorized to do whatever it takes to get our people home. Roger that, Henderson Control. Marlin Squadron is moving to intercept position. We'll make ourselves very visible to your bandits. As Patricia Reeves led her training squadron toward a confrontation they weren't equipped for, Sarah realized she was now coordinating the movements of 16 aircraft across hundreds of square miles of ocean, all from a concrete bunker where she wasn't supposed to do anything. More complicated than relay weather reports. But the night was far from over. Danny Walsh's engine was getting worse. The Japanese fighters were closing in despite Marlin Squadron's diversion, and Sarah was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one you can see on radar, it's the one you never heard coming at all. Henderson Control. Morrison's voice cut through the static tense now. I'm showing new contacts on my scope. Multiple aircraft, low altitude, coming up from the south. They're not broadcasting IFF signals. Sarah's blood went cold. While she'd been tracking the main enemy formation from the east, a second group had approached from the opposite direction, flying low to avoid radar detection until the last possible moment. Eagle Squadron was about to be caught in a pincer movement, trapped between 2 enemy formations with nowhere to run and no fuel for extended combat maneuvering. And Sarah Chen, the night shift radio operator who wasn't supposed to handle anything important, was the only person in position to guide them through the trap that was closing around them. Sarah stared at Marcus Johnson's updated radar plot, her mind racing through calculations that would have challenged experienced air traffic controllers. 2 enemy formations, 18 fighters from the east, and at least 12 more approaching from the south, were converging on Eagle Squadron's position with mathematical precision. Marcus, show me the exact timing, she said, grabbing a pencil. To mark the radar coordinates. When do these formations intersect Eagle Squadron's flight path? Johnson traced the convergent tracks with his finger. Eastern Group reaches intercept in 14 minutes. Southern Group, flying low and fast. Maybe 16 minutes. But here's the problem. Eagle Squadron will be right in the middle when both groups arrive. Sarah keyed her microphone. Eagle Leader, Henderson Control. I need your exact fuel status, all aircraft. Morrison's voice came back grim. Henderson Control, we're running on fumes. Eagle 3 is down to maybe 10 minutes of flight time. The rest of the squadron has 15-20 minutes max. We can't outrun what's coming. In the background, Sarah could hear Danny Walsh's failing engine getting rougher, the propeller rhythm increasingly erratic. The kid from Oklahoma was flying a dying aircraft with enemy fighters closing in, and every minute in the air brought him closer to engine failure over open ocean. Eagle Leader, I need you to do something that's going to sound crazy, Sarah said. I need Eagle Squadron to split up. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Morrison came back. Henderson Control, explain that request. We don't abandon wingmen. Jake, listen to me carefully. The enemy formations are timed to catch your entire squadron in one location. If you split up now, I can guide the damaged aircraft home on the safest route while the rest of Eagle Squadron draws the enemy away from Danny. Negative, Henderson Control. We don't leave anyone behind. Sarah had expected this response. She'd been listening to Morrison's radio discipline for months and knew he was the kind of leader who'd risk his entire squadron before abandoning a single pilot. But sometimes leadership meant making impossible choices. Marlin Leader, this is Henderson Control. Sarah called to Patricia Reeves' training squadron. What's your current position relative to the eastern enemy formation? Reeves' voice crackled through. Henderson Control, we're approximately 8 miles north of the eastern bandits. They've definitely seen us. 3 of them have broken off to investigate. But Henderson, we're not equipped for actual combat. Marlin Leader, understood. Can you maintain visual contact without engaging? I need real-time position reports on that formation. Roger, Henderson Control. We'll be your eyes in the sky. As Patricia Reeves maneuvered her training squadron to shadow the enemy fighters, Sarah turned her attention to a solution that was forming in her mind. A plan so audacious it would either save Eagle's squadron or get them all killed. She reached for a different radio frequency, one she'd never used before, the emergency coordination channel that connected Henderson Field with other Allied bases across the Pacific. Her father had taught her that sometimes you had to break the rules to fix the problem. Any Allied station, this is Henderson Field Emergency Coordination. I have multiple aircraft in immediate danger and need assistance from any available units in grid squares 77 through 81. The response came from an unexpected direction. Henderson Emergency, this is Cactus Base. Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Torres commanding. We have a flight of 4 Corsairs returning from patrol, approximately 30 miles southwest of your position. What's your situation? Sarah quickly explained the tactical picture. Eagle Squadron trapped between 2 enemy formations. 1 aircraft with engine failure, fuel running critically low. Torres listened without interruption, then came back with the voice of someone used to making life-or-death decisions quickly. Henderson Emergency, Cactus Flight can provide assistance, but we're also low on fuel. We can engage 1 enemy formation, but we'll need immediate clearance to land at your field afterward. Cactus Leader, you have landing clearance. I'm transmitting approach frequencies now. Sarah was making commitments far beyond her authority, but there was no time to wake up the base commander for approval. Now she had 3 separate formations to coordinate. Eagle Squadron trying to get home, Marlin Squadron shadowing enemy fighters, and Cactus Flight preparing to engage. The tactical complexity was overwhelming, but Sarah found herself thinking in the systematic way her father had taught her when troubleshooting complex radio circuits. Eagle Leader, Henderson Control. New plan. I need you to take Eagle Squadron north by northwest, bearing 30. This will take you away from both enemy formations, but toward Cactus Flight, which will provide cover. Henderson Control. That bearing takes us further from base. Eagle 3 won't make it. Jake, Eagle 3 is going to take a different route. I'm sending Danny directly home with a special escort. What Sarah did next would have ended her military career if anyone had been monitoring her transmissions. She switched to a frequency she wasn't authorized to use and made a call that broke every protocol in the manual. Henderson Tower, this is Henderson Emergency Coordination. I need immediate runway preparation for emergency landing. Aircraft with engine failure inbound in 12 minutes. The tower operator, Chief Petty Officer Robert Kim, came back confused. Henderson. Emergency. This is Tower. I don't show any emergency aircraft on approach. What's your authority for this request? Tower, this is Sarah Chun in radio operations. I have Eagle 3 inbound with engine failure and enemy fighters in pursuit. I need the runway cleared and emergency crew standing by. There was a pause, then Kim's voice, more alert. Chun, are you coordinating aircraft movements from the radio bunker? You're not certified for air traffic control. Rob, I don't have time to explain the chain of command. Do you want Danny Walsh to make it home or not? Robert Kim had been at Henderson Field since the base was constructed. He'd watched dozens of aircraft return from combat, some barely flying, some not making it back at all. He understood that sometimes protocols mattered less than saving lives. Emergency crews are rolling, Chun. Runway 36 is cleared for immediate approach. With the runway secured, Sarah turned her attention back to the aerial chess game developing over the Pacific. Marlin's squadron was still shadowing the eastern enemy formation. Cactus Flight was moving to intercept position, and Eagle Squadron was beginning to separate according to her plan. Eagle 3, this is Henderson Control. Danny, I need you to break off from the formation now. Come bearing 170, direct to base. Danny Walsh's voice came through, shaky but determined. Henderson Control, Eagle 3 breaking off. But Skip, I don't like leaving the squadron. Eagle 3, you're not leaving anyone. You're leading the way home. As Danny Walsh turned his failing aircraft toward Henderson Field, Sarah realized she needed one more element to make this plan work, something to ensure the enemy fighters followed Eagle Squadron's main formation instead of pursuing the lone damaged aircraft. Marlin Leader, Henderson Control. I need Marlin Squadron to do something that's going to require precise timing. Patricia Reeves responded immediately. Henderson Control, Marlin Leader. What do you need? I need you to make the eastern enemy formation think you're the primary threat. Can you simulate a bombing approach toward their base area? Henderson Control, you're asking us to fly directly at 18 enemy fighters in training aircraft with minimal ammunition. Marlin Leader, I'm asking you to fly toward them just long enough to get their attention, then break off at maximum range. Make them think Henderson Field is launching a major strike. The silence stretched for almost 30 seconds. When Patricia Reeves came back, her voice carried a mixture of determination and resignation. Henderson Control, Marlin Squadron understands the mission. We're beginning our approach now. As Patricia Reeves led her 4 training aircraft on a simulated attack run that would draw enemy attention away from Eagle Squadron, Sarah found herself coordinating the most complex aerial operation of her life from a bunker where she was supposed to do nothing more challenging than relay routine messages, but the plan was working. The eastern enemy formation took the bait, turning to engage what they thought was a major Allied strike. Cactus Flight moved into position to support Marlin Squadron's withdrawal. Eagle Squadron, minus Danny Walsh, was flying northwest away from immediate danger. And Danny Walsh, his engine now missing badly enough that Sarah could hear it through his radio transmission, was 5 minutes out from Henderson Field with a clear approach route. Eagle 3, Henderson Control. You're cleared for the straight-in approach, runway 36. Emergency crews are standing by. Henderson Control, Eagle 3, the engines. Really rough now, but I can see the field. Sarah, I don't know who you are, but thank you for getting me home. That was when everything went wrong. Marcus Johnson burst back into the bunker, his face pale. Sarah, we've got a problem. That southern enemy formation, they didn't take the bait. They're still coming north, and they're going to intercept Eagle 3's approach path in 3 minutes. Sarah looked at the radar plot, her heart sinking. While she'd been focused on the eastern threat, the southern enemy formation had continued on course, apparently uninterested in the decoy operations that had diverted their allies. 8 Japanese fighters were now positioned perfectly to catch Danny Walsh during his most vulnerable moment, landing approach with a failing engine. Eagle 3, Henderson Control. You have bandits approaching from the south. Can you increase airspeed for the final approach? Danny Walsh's reply was barely audible over his rough engine. Henderson Control. This thing won't go any faster. The engine's about to quit completely. Sarah stared at the radar screen, watching the enemy fighters close in on Danny's position. She'd successfully coordinated multiple formations, drawn off most of the enemy threat, and cleared the way for 11 of Eagle Squadron's aircraft to escape. But she was about to watch Danny Walsh get shot down within sight of his home runway, and there was nothing left in her tactical toolbox to save him. That was when Chief Petty Officer Robert Kim's voice crackled through the radio with 8 words that would change everything. Henderson Control Tower, I've got an idea. Tower, Henderson Control, what's your idea? Sarah's voice betrayed none of the desperation she felt as she watched the radar blips representing enemy fighters close in on Danny Walsh's position. Robert Kim's response came through with the calm precision of someone who'd spent years watching aircraft in crisis. Sarah, how well do you know the base defense grid? Sarah blinked in confusion. Henderson Field's anti-aircraft batteries had been silent for weeks. Most of the Japanese bombing raids had shifted to other targets, and the big guns were primarily manned during daylight hours when attacks were most likely. Tower, I'm not following. The batteries aren't manned during the night shift. Sarah, listen carefully. I've got keys to the battery control systems. The guns might not be manned, but the searchlights are all operational and tied into the main electrical grid. If I can coordinate with you on timing, we can light up those bandits like it's Christmas morning. The implications hit Sarah immediately. 8 enemy fighters approaching in darkness, suddenly caught in the brilliant glare of multiple searchlights, would be temporarily blinded and disoriented. It might give Danny Walsh the few minutes he needed to reach the runway. Tower, do it. I'll coordinate with Eagle 3 on final approach timing. As Robert Kim sprinted from the control tower toward the battery control station, Sarah keyed her microphone. Eagle 3, Henderson Control. I need you to maintain current airspeed and heading. Do not deviate from approach path regardless of what happens around you. Danny Walsh's voice came back, his engine now misfiring so badly the words were broken by mechanical stuttering. Henderson Control ... understood. Staying on ... approach. Sarah switched frequencies to coordinate with the other elements of her improvised air battle. Marlin Leader, Henderson Control. Status report on Eastern bandits. Patricia Reeves' voice carried the strain of someone flying a training aircraft against combat fighters. Henderson Control. Eastern formation is fully engaged with our position. Cactus Flight has arrived and the situation is ... dynamic. We're keeping them busy, but we can't maintain this indefinitely. Marlin Leader understood. Maintain position for 90 more seconds, then break off and head for base. 90 seconds. That was how long Danny Walsh needed to reach the runway threshold. Sarah found herself staring at her father's watch, counting down the moments between a successful rescue and catastrophe. The southern enemy formation was now less than 2 miles from Danny's position, close enough that Sarah could track their movement on Marcus Johnson's most sensitive radar settings. 8 fighters in perfect attack formation, converging on a single damaged aircraft that could barely maintain altitude. Tower, Henderson Control. How long until searchlights are operational? Robert Kim's voice came back breathless. Sarah, I'm at the battery station now. Give me 30 seconds to bring the grid online. Through her headset, Sarah could hear Danny Walsh's engine getting worse. The propeller was hitting so irregularly now that she wondered how the aircraft was staying airborne at all. The kid from Oklahoma was flying on determination and rapidly diminishing mechanical tolerance. Eagle 3, Henderson Control. Distance to runway, Henderson Control ... 2 miles out. Can see the approach lights. Sarah looked at Marcus Johnson's radar screen. The enemy fighters were 1.5 miles from Danny's position, closing fast. Even if Robert Kim got the searchlights operational immediately, the timing would be impossibly close. That was when Sarah realized she had one more card to play, a desperate gambit that would either blind the enemy fighters or guide them directly to their target. Tower, Henderson Control. When you activate those searchlights, I need you to sweep them across the approach path in a specific pattern. Sarah, what kind of pattern? Random sweeps, multiple directions. Make it look like we're searching for something we've lost, not tracking something we're trying to protect. Robert Kim understood immediately. Sarah, you want them to think Danny's already down somewhere in the darkness. Exactly. If they think they missed their target, they might break off the attack to search for wreckage. As Sarah finished explaining her plan, another voice cut through the radio frequency, one she recognized but had never heard sound so urgent. Henderson Control, this is Rebecca Martinez in Transport 77. I'm 10 miles south of the field with a full load of medical supplies. I can see aircraft lights ahead of me. Are those the bandits you're tracking? Sarah's mind raced. Rebecca Martinez, the competent transport pilot who'd been flying supply runs for months, was approaching Henderson Field from the south, directly through the path of the enemy fighters pursuing Danny Walsh. Transport 77, Henderson Control. Confirm your position relative to multiple aircraft contacts. Henderson Control, I've got visual on at least 6 aircraft, flying in formation, about 5 miles ahead of my position. They're not broadcasting IFF signals. Rebecca Martinez was flying a slow, unarmed transport aircraft directly toward 8 enemy fighters, and she didn't know they were hostile. Transport 77, those are enemy aircraft. Alter course immediately to bearing 270 and climb to maximum altitude. Henderson Control, understood. But wait, I can see another aircraft behind them, flying much lower. Single engine, looks like he's in trouble. Through the chaos of coordinating multiple aircraft, radio frequencies, and tactical decisions, Sarah suddenly realized that Rebecca Martinez might be the solution to an impossible problem. Transport 77, that single aircraft is Eagle 3 with engine failure. I need you to do something that's going to sound insane. Henderson Control, I'm listening. Rebecca, I need you to turn on every light you have, navigation lights, landing lights, interior lights, everything. Then I need you to fly directly at those enemy fighters. The silence that followed was broken only by Danny Walsh's failing engine and the distant sound of combat from Marlin Squadron's position. Henderson Control, you want me to fly a transport plane at 8 enemy fighters? Rebecca, listen to me carefully. Those fighters are focused on Danny's aircraft below them. If you appear suddenly with all lights blazing, flying straight at them from an unexpected direction, they'll think you're either attacking or about to collide with them. Fighter pilot's instinct is to break formation and avoid collision. Henderson Control, that's assuming they don't just shoot me down. Sarah looked at Marcus Johnson's radar screen. The enemy fighters were now less than a mile from Danny Walsh's position. In 60 seconds, it would all be over. Rebecca, it's your choice. But Danny Walsh is going to die if someone doesn't distract those fighters in the next minute. Rebecca Martinez had flown supply runs through weather that grounded military aircraft, delivered medical supplies to forward bases under artillery fire, and evacuated wounded personnel from airstrips that were barely more than cleared jungle. She was not someone who backed down from calculated risks. Henderson Control, Transport 77 is lighting up and going in. As Rebecca Martinez turned her transport aircraft toward the enemy formation, Sarah coordinated the final elements of her desperate plan. Tower, Henderson Control, searchlights in 30 seconds. Eagle 3, Henderson Control. Maintain an approach. Ignore everything around you. Transport 77, Henderson Control. Light them up and brake hard left at 500 yards. The next 60 seconds would determine whether Sarah Chun's improvised coordination would save Danny Walsh or result in multiple aircraft losses that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Through her headset, she could hear the sounds of 3 separate air battles, Marlin Squadron and Cactus Flight engaging the eastern enemy formation. Danny Walsh's engine failing completely as he approached the runway. and Rebecca Martinez flying her transport directly at 8 enemy fighters in a maneuver that defied every rule of aerial warfare. Henderson Control, Transport 7-7. I have a visual on the enemy formation. Turning on all the lights. Now. Marcus Johnson looked up from his radar screen, his eyes wide. Sarah, Martinez just lit up like a Christmas tree. The enemy formation is ... They're breaking. The fighters are scattering in all directions. At that exact moment, Robert Kim activated Henderson Field's searchlight battery. Brilliant white beams swept across the sky in seemingly random patterns, creating a lightshow that must have been visible for 50 miles. Danny Walsh's voice crackled through the radio. Weaker now but determined. Henderson Control. I can see the runway, coming in for landing. But Sarah's relief was premature. As she watched Marcus Johnson's radar screen, she realized that while Rebecca Martinez's surprise appearance had scattered the enemy formation, it had also created a new problem. 3 of the enemy fighters, instead of fleeing south, had turned north toward Henderson Field. They were now positioned between Danny Walsh and the runway, and his failing engine meant he couldn't climb, turn, or accelerate to avoid them. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and Sarah Chun was about to discover that sometimes saving one life requires risking everything else. All stations, this is Henderson Control, Sarah called on the emergency frequency. I have friendly aircraft on final approach with enemy fighters in the traffic pattern. I need immediate assistance from any available units. The response came from a voice she hadn't heard before, calm, professional, and very close. Henderson Control. This is Henderson Field Base Security. We've been monitoring your transmissions. Stand by for ground-based assistance. Sarah looked at Marcus Johnson in confusion. Marcus, what's ground-based assistance? Johnson was studying his radar screen intently. Sarah, there are vehicles moving on the base perimeter. Fast vehicles heading toward the runway approach area. Through the concrete walls of the bunker, Sarah could hear something she'd never heard before at Henderson Field. The roar of engines at ground level, moving at high speed. Danny Walsh was about to land in the middle of the most unconventional air battle of the Pacific War. And Sarah was about to learn that sometimes the most effective air defense doesn't come from the sky at all. The roar of engines at ground level grew louder as Sarah tried to comprehend what ground-based assistance could possibly mean in an aerial combat situation. Through Marcus Johnson's radar scope, she could see Danny Walsh's aircraft on final approach, 3 enemy fighters converging on the runway area, and now mysterious vehicle movements around the base perimeter. Henderson Base Security, this is Henderson Control. What kind of ground-based assistance are you providing? The response came from Major Catherine Brooks, Base Security Commander, whose voice carried the authority of someone who'd been planning for exactly this type of scenario. Henderson Control, we've been monitoring enemy air activity for the past hour. We have mobile anti-aircraft units positioned around the runway approach. If those bandits want to attack aircraft in our traffic pattern, they're going to get a surprise. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that Danny Walsh might actually have protection during his landing attempt. Terror that she was about to witness anti-aircraft fire in the immediate vicinity of Henderson Field's active runway. Base Security, Henderson Control. Be advised, friendly aircraft Eagle 3 is on final approach, extremely low altitude due to engine failure. How will you distinguish between friendly and enemy targets? Henderson Control, we've been tracking your coordination all night. We know exactly where Eagle 3 is positioned. The bandits are about to learn why we don't allow uninvited guests in our airspace. As Major Brooks finished her transmission, Danny Walsh's voice came through Sarah's headset, barely audible over his completely failing engine. Henderson Control. Eagle 3. The engine just quit completely. I'm dead stick from here. Sarah's blood went cold. A dead-stick landing meant Danny was now gliding a powerless aircraft toward the runway with no ability to accelerate, climb, or execute evasive maneuvers. He was completely committed to his current flight path, regardless of what enemy fighters might do. Eagle 3, Henderson Control. The runway is clear. Emergency crew standing by. Maintain glide slope and prepare for emergency landing. Through the chaos of multiple radio frequencies, Sarah heard Rebecca Martinez check in. Henderson Control, Transport 77. I've broken off from the enemy formation, but 3 of them followed me north. They're between me and the base. Now, Sarah looked at Marcus Johnson's radar screen and realized the tactical situation had become impossibly complex. Danny Walsh was gliding powerless toward the runway. 3 enemy fighters were in the traffic pattern, presumably hunting for targets. Rebecca Martinez was somewhere north of the field, being pursued by 3 more enemy fighters. And Eagle squadrons. Main formation was still engaged with the Eastern Enemy Group, supported by Cactus Flight and Marlin Squadron. All stations, Henderson Control. I need position reports from all friendly aircraft. The situation is about to get very dynamic. Patricia Reeves from Marlin Squadron responded first. Henderson Control, Marlin Leader. Eastern engagement is winding down. Cactus Flight has driven off most of the bandits, but we're all critically low on fuel. Requesting immediate clearance to land. Samuel Torres from Cactus Flight confirmed. Henderson Control, Cactus Leader. We've scattered the eastern formation, but we need to get on the ground now. Fuel state is an emergency for all aircraft. Jake. Morrison's voice cut through next. Henderson Control, Eagle Leader. Main formation is clear of immediate threats and inbound to base. What's the status of Eagle 3? Sarah found herself coordinating the return of over 20 aircraft to a single runway, while enemy fighters operated in the immediate vicinity, and Danny Walsh attempted an emergency landing without power. The complexity was beyond anything she'd trained for, beyond anything anyone had trained for. Eagle Leader, Eagle 3, is on final approach with complete engine failure. We have hostile aircraft in the traffic pattern, but base security has mobile anti-aircraft units in position. Henderson Control, Eagle Leader requesting permission to provide cover for Eagle 3's landing. Eagle Leader, negative. You're critically low on fuel, and the airspace around the field is about to become very dangerous. Maintain a holding pattern at 5,000 feet until the runway is clear. What happened next would be remembered as one of the most unusual air engagements of the Pacific War. As Danny Walsh's powerless aircraft descended through 1,000 feet, the 3 enemy fighters in the traffic pattern began their attack runs. They approached from different angles, clearly intending to catch the disabled American aircraft in a crossfire that would be impossible to survive. That was when Major Catherine Brooks' mobile anti-aircraft units revealed themselves. The first enemy fighter, diving toward Danny's aircraft from the east, suddenly found himself flying through a curtain of tracer fire from a hidden 40mm gun position. The pilot, startled by ground fire where he expected none, pulled up sharply and broke off his attack. The second fighter, approaching from the west, encountered a different surprise. As he lined up his shot on Danny's defenseless aircraft, searchlights from 3 different positions suddenly focused on his cockpit, blinding him completely. He flew past the runway without firing a shot, desperately trying to regain his vision. The third fighter, coming in from the south, met the most innovative defense of all. As he approached Danny Walsh's glide path, Rebecca Martinez's transport aircraft suddenly appeared directly in front of him, all lights blazing, flying straight at him in what appeared to be a kamikaze attack. The enemy pilot, faced with the choice between shooting down a military transport that was about to collide with him or taking evasive action, chose survival. He broke hard left, abandoning his attack run to avoid collision. Danny Walsh, unaware of the defensive coordination happening around him, focused solely on reaching the runway. His aircraft, now completely without power, was dropping at a rate that made Sarah hold her breath. Through her headset, she could hear his breathing, steady and controlled, despite flying a machine that was essentially an expensive glider. Eagle 3, Henderson Control. You're looking good for runway 36. Touchdown in 30 seconds. Henderson Control ... Eagle 3. Thanks for getting me home ... The landing was not graceful. Danny Walsh's aircraft hit the runway hard, bounced twice, and slewed sideways before coming to rest in a cloud of dust and smoke, but it was on. The ground, intact, and Danny was alive. Emergency crews reached the aircraft within seconds. Through her radio, Sarah could hear Chief Petty Officer Robert Kim coordinating the rescue. Medical team to runway 36. The pilot is conscious and responding. Aircraft secure. But the night wasn't over. With Danny safely on the ground, Sarah turned her attention to the remaining tactical challenges. Rebecca Martinez was still being pursued by 3 enemy fighters north of the base. Patricia Reeves' Marlin Squadron and Samuel Torres' Cactus Flight were both critically low on fuel and needed immediate landing clearance. And Jake Morrison's Eagle Squadron main formation was holding at 5,000 feet, also running low on fuel. Transport 77, Henderson Control. What's your current situation? Rebecca Martinez's voice came back strained. Henderson Control. I've got 3 bandits on my tail, but I'm faster than they expected. I'm leading them away from the base, but I can't keep this up much longer. Sarah realized that Rebecca was sacrificing her own safety to draw enemy fighters away from the crowded airspace around Henderson Field. The transport pilot was flying alone through hostile skies to protect aircraft that were trying to land. Transport 77, Henderson Control. Can you maintain your current heading for 2 more minutes? Henderson Control, affirmative. But after that, I'll need to head for base myself. Sarah keyed the frequency that connected her to all stations. All aircraft, Henderson Control. We're going to execute a coordinated landing sequence. Marlin Squadron and Cactus Flight, you're cleared for immediate approach, runway 36. Eagle Squadron main formation, begin descent to traffic pattern altitude. Transport 77, in 2 minutes turn direct to base for priority landing. What followed was a carefully orchestrated aerial ballet that would have impressed peacetime. Air traffic controllers. Patricia Reeves brought Marlin Squadron in first, 4 training aircraft touching down in rapid succession. Samuel Torres followed with Cactus Flight, their combat-worn Corsairs landing with the precision of pilots who'd been fighting for their lives just minutes earlier. As the last of Cactus Flight cleared the runway, Jake Morrison began Eagle Squadrons. Approach. 11 aircraft in formation, guided by Sarah's voice through the darkness, each pilot trusting her judgment completely. Eagle Leader, Henderson Control. Runway is clear, you're cleared for approach. Henderson Control, Eagle Leader. On behalf of Eagle Squadron, thank you for getting us all home tonight. As Eagle Squadron touched down safely, Sarah felt the exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She'd been coordinating aircraft movements for over 3 hours, making decisions that affected the lives of dozens of pilots, operating far beyond her training and authority, but there was still 1 aircraft in the air, Transport 77, Henderson Control. Status report. Rebecca Martinez's voice came back, calmer now. Henderson Control. Those 3 bandits gave up the chase about 5 minutes ago. I think they headed back to their base. I'm inbound for landing, everything is normal. As Rebecca Martinez brought her transport aircraft in for a routine landing, Sarah Chun sat back in her chair and looked around the radio bunker that had been her command center for the most complex night of her life. Marcus Johnson was updating his final radar plots, documenting the positions and movements of over 30 aircraft during a 6-hour period. The walls were covered with frequency charts, navigation calculations, and tactical notes that told the story of an improvised air battle coordinated by a night shift radio operator who wasn't supposed to handle anything more complicated than weather reports. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "you know they're going to want to debrief this entire operation. Every decision, every transmission, every coordination you made tonight." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware that she'd spent the night operating far outside normal protocols, coordinating multiple bases, directing aircraft movements without authorization, and making tactical decisions that would normally require approval from officers several ranks above her pay grade. "Marcus, do you think I'll be in trouble?" Marcus Johnson looked at the radar plots showing the safe return of every Allied aircraft that had been in danger, then at the radio logs documenting Sarah's coordination of the most successful defensive air operation Henderson Field had ever witnessed. "Sarah, I think you're going to get a medal." The bunker door opened, and Staff Sergeant Walter Briggs walked in, followed by several officers Sarah had never seen before. Briggs looked around at the organized chaos of charts, radio equipment, and tactical documentation, then at Sarah Chun, the night shift radio operator who had somehow coordinated a multi-squadron air battle from a concrete bunker. "Chun," Briggs said, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and respect she'd never heard before, "I think we need to have a conversation about your job description." As the sun rose over Henderson Field, Sarah Chun realized that her life as an overlooked night shift radio operator was over. She'd found her voice in the static-filled darkness of the Pacific War, and that voice had guided 12 pilots through enemy fire and brought them all home. The quiet girl from her father's electronics shop in San Francisco had become something she'd never expected, the person other people counted on when everything went wrong, and there was no one else to call. And in a war where heroes were measured by the lives they saved rather than the enemies they destroyed, Sarah Chun had saved them all. The officers who followed Staff Sergeant Briggs into Sarah's bunker wore insignia she didn't recognize: intelligence specialists, communications analysts, and a full colonel whose presence made everyone in the room stand straighter. Colonel James Mitchell had flown in from Pacific Fleet Command specifically to understand how a night shift radio operator had coordinated what intelligence reports were already calling the most successful defensive air operation in the theater. "Petty Officer Chun," Colonel Mitchell said, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "I've been reading preliminary reports about tonight's activities. Before we proceed with any formal debriefing, I need to understand something. Who authorized you to coordinate multi-base aircraft movements?" Sarah felt her stomach drop. In the adrenaline and urgency of the night's events, she'd never stopped to consider the chain of command implications of her actions. She'd made decisions that should have required approval from officers several ranks above her, coordinated with bases she'd never been authorized to contact, and essentially functioned as an air traffic controller without certification or permission. "Sir, no one authorized those actions. I made those decisions on my own initiative." Colonel Mitchell studied her for a long moment, then looked around the bunker at the tactical charts, frequency logs, and coordination notes that documented every decision she'd made. "Petty Officer Chun, do you understand that unauthorized coordination of military aircraft during combat operations is a court-martial offense?" The silence in the bunker was deafening. Marcus Johnson shifted uncomfortably beside his radar equipment. Staff Sergeant Briggs looked like he wanted to disappear. Sarah felt the weight of every decision she'd made during the night settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "Yes, sir, I understand that now." "Good," Colonel Mitchell said, surprising everyone in the room. "Because understanding the magnitude of what you did makes what happened tonight even more remarkable. Petty Officer Chun, you saved the lives of 16 pilots, coordinated the successful engagement of over 30 enemy aircraft, and managed complex tactical operations that would challenge experienced air controllers. You did this with no training, no authority, and no backup support. Colonel Mitchell walked to Sarah's radio station, examining the equipment she'd used to coordinate the night's operations. I've been in military aviation for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like what you accomplished tonight. The question now is what we do with someone who has demonstrated capabilities far beyond their current assignment. Before Sarah could respond, voices outside the bunker announced the arrival of more visitors. Danny Walsh walked in, still wearing his flight suit, followed by Jake Morrison, Patricia Reeves, Rebecca Martinez, and several other pilots Sarah had coordinated throughout the night. "Colonel," Danny Walsh said, his Oklahoma accent thicker than usual with emotion, "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but we heard there might be questions about what happened tonight." Jake Morrison stepped forward, his bearing showing the natural authority that had made him a squadron leader. "Sir, if there's any suggestion that Petty Officer Chun acted improperly tonight, then every pilot in this room would like to go on record." "And what would that record show, Squadron Leader Morrison?" "Sarah Chun's coordination saved our lives. Every decision she made was tactically sound, professionally executed, and completely focused on getting us home safely. Any pilot in the Pacific Theater would be honored to have her providing radio support." Patricia Reeves nodded emphatically. "Colonel, I've flown training missions with controllers from 3 different bases. None of them could have managed what Sarah accomplished tonight. She understood not just radio procedures, but flight operations, tactical considerations, and resource management." Rebecca Martinez, still wearing her transport pilot's gear, added her perspective. "Sir, when Sarah asked me to fly my transport at enemy fighters, it was the craziest request I'd ever heard. But she explained the tactical reasoning, considered the risks, and gave me enough information to make an informed decision. That's not luck, that's professional competence." Colonel Mitchell listened to each pilot's testimony, taking notes in a small leather-bound book. When they finished, he looked around the room at an unusual assembly: combat pilots defending a radio operator, intelligence officers trying to understand how unauthorized actions had produced perfect results, and Sarah Chun herself, still trying to comprehend how her night shift had turned into a court-martial hearing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Mitchell said finally, "what we have here is a problem that's never been addressed in military regulations. We have a service member who violated protocols, exceeded authority, and ignored chain of command. And in doing so, achieved results that exceeded every tactical objective we could have hoped for." The colonel closed his notebook and looked directly at Sarah. "Petty Officer Chun, Pacific Fleet Command has been discussing personnel deployments for a new type of operation. We're establishing centralized coordination centers that will provide real-time tactical support to aircraft across multiple bases. These centers will require operators who can think independently, make rapid decisions under pressure, and coordinate complex multi-unit operations." Sarah felt her heart racing. "Sir, are you offering me a transfer?" "I'm offering you a promotion and a completely new job description. The rank of Chief Petty Officer, assignment to Pacific Fleet Tactical Coordination Center, and responsibilities. That will make tonight's activities look routine." The offer was everything Sarah had never dared to imagine: recognition for her abilities, responsibility commensurate with her demonstrated skills, and work that would challenge every capability she possessed. But it also meant leaving Henderson Field, leaving the radio bunker where she discovered her abilities, leaving the familiar routine that had been her life for the past 3 months. "Colonel, may I ask where this coordination center would be?" "Located? Pearl Harbor. You'd be working directly with Pacific Fleet Command, coordinating operations across the entire theater. The work would be classified, the responsibilities enormous, and the decisions you make would affect thousands of personnel." Before Sarah could respond, Danny Walsh stepped forward. "Colonel, if I may say something. Sarah, when my engine quit, Tonight, and I was gliding toward what looked like certain death. Your voice was the only thing between me and the bottom of the Pacific. You didn't just coordinate aircraft movements. You gave us confidence that someone competent was watching out for us." Jake Morrison nodded agreement. "Sarah, there are pilots throughout the Pacific who are going to hear about tonight. They're going to want to know that when they're in trouble, there's someone like you coordinating their support. Pearl Harbor is where you can help the most people." Patricia Reeves added her perspective. "I've been flying training missions for 6 months. Watching new pilots learn to trust their equipment, their training, and their ground support. Tonight, I learned what it means to have ground support you can trust completely. Other pilots deserve that same confidence." Rebecca Martinez, who had risked her own life flying a transport aircraft against enemy fighters based on Sarah's tactical assessment, put the decision in personal terms. "Sarah, you saved all of us tonight. At Pearl Harbor, you could save hundreds of others." As Sarah listened to the pilots who had become more than radio voices during the night's crisis, she realized that her decision involved more than personal career advancement. The skills she'd discovered, the abilities she'd developed, the confidence she'd gained, these weren't just personal achievements. They were capabilities that could serve a larger purpose. "Colonel Mitchell," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt, "when would this assignment begin?" "Transport leaves Henderson. Field in 3 days. You'd report to Pearl Harbor for specialized training, then begin coordinating operations within 2 weeks. 3 days. Sarah looked around the radio bunker that had been her workplace, her training ground, and the site of the most important night of her life. The equipment her father had taught her to operate, the charts she'd learned to read, the frequencies that had become as familiar as her own voice. "Sir, I accept the assignment." The response was immediate and unanimous. Applause from the pilots, approving nods from the intelligence officers, and a rare smile from Staff Sergeant Briggs. "Outstanding," Colonel Mitchell said. "Chief Petty Officer Chun, your orders will be cut tomorrow. Report to Pearl Harbor Transportation Command at 0800 hours on March 18th. As the formal meeting dissolved and the various officers began filing out of the bunker, the pilots lingered to say personal goodbyes. Danny Walsh shook her hand with the fervor of someone thanking the person who saved his life. Jake Morrison promised to put in for assignments that would bring him through Pearl Harbor. Patricia Reeves and Rebecca Martinez exchanged information about maintaining contact across the vast distances of the Pacific Theater. When the bunker finally emptied, except for Sarah and Marcus Johnson, the radar operator looked at his friend and colleague with a mixture of pride and sadness. "Sarah, you know this place won't be the same without you. Marcus, you're the one who made tonight possible. Your radar tracking, your tactical updates, your support, none of this works without people like you." Marcus Johnson had spent months watching Sarah Chun transform from an uncertain rookie into the most competent radio operator he'd ever worked with. Tonight, he'd watched her become something unprecedented, a tactical coordinator whose abilities exceeded her rank, her training, and every expectation anyone had held for her. "Sarah, there's something I want to give you before you leave for Pearl Harbor." Marcus reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook, worn from months of use. "These are my notes on radar interpretation, tactical tracking, and coordination procedures. Everything I've learned about reading the invisible war that happens on radar screens." Sarah accepted the notebook, understanding that Marcus was giving her years of accumulated knowledge and experience. "Marcus, I can't take your operational manual. You're not taking it, you're carrying it forward. At Pearl Harbor, you're going to coordinate operations I can't even imagine. But the fundamentals will be the same: watching for threats, tracking friendly units, understanding what the electronic signals mean in human terms." As Sarah packed her few personal belongings and prepared to leave the radio bunker, She realized that her transformation from night shift operator to tactical coordinator was only the beginning of a journey she couldn't yet fully comprehend. 3 days later, she would board a transport aircraft bound for Pearl Harbor, carrying with her the confidence gained from guiding 12 pilots through enemy fire, the knowledge accumulated through months of listening to radio waves, and the responsibility of serving something larger than herself. But tonight, for a few more hours, she was still Sarah Chun, the radio operator who had found her voice in the static and used it to bring everyone home. 6 months after that transformative night at Henderson Field, Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chun stood in the Pacific Fleet Tactical Coordination Center, a facility that hadn't existed when she was guiding Eagle Squadron through enemy fire. The center occupied an entire floor of a reinforced concrete building, its walls lined with radio equipment that made her old bunker look primitive by comparison. Control 7. This is Hellcat Formation. 12 aircraft inbound from Tarawa, requesting priority approach due to battle damage. Sarah's voice, now carrying the authority of experience and rank, responded with the calm precision that had become her trademark. Hellcat Formation. Control 7. You're cleared for priority approach, runway 08. Medical teams are standing by. The coordination center buzzed with controlled activity. 30 radio operators, trained using procedures Sarah had helped develop, managed air traffic across an area spanning thousands of square miles. Digital plotting boards tracked hundreds of aircraft simultaneously, while encrypted communication systems linked Pearl Harbor with bases from Australia to Alaska. Lieutenant Commander David Park, the center's operations director, approached Sarah's station as she finished coordinating the damaged aircraft's approach. Chief Chun, Admiral Nimitz wants to see you in his office at 1400 hours. Sarah felt the familiar flutter of nervous energy that came with high-level meetings. Even after 6 months of coordinating fleet-wide operations, being summoned by the commander of Pacific Fleet remained intimidating. Sir, may I ask what this concerns? The Admiral is announcing the results of Operation Cartwheel. Your coordination work during the Solomon Islands campaign apparently exceeded all expectations. Operation Cartwheel had been Sarah's first major test at the fleet level, coordinating air support for simultaneous amphibious landings across multiple islands, managing resources that included over 400 aircraft and crews from 6 different nations. The complexity had made her work at Henderson Field seem straightforward by comparison. At 1400 hours precisely, Sarah stood at attention in Admiral Chester Nimitz's office, surrounded by maps showing the vast expanse of the Pacific Theater. Admiral, whose strategic decisions affected millions of personnel, studied a report that Sarah recognized as her operational summary from the Solomon Islands campaign. Chief Chun, I've been reviewing your coordination metrics from Operation Cartwheel. 0 aircraft losses due to coordination failures, 97% on-time mission completion, and tactical adjustments that saved an estimated 43 aircraft from enemy intercept. Thank you, sir. The credit belongs to the entire coordination team. Admiral Nimitz looked up from his report, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Chief, I didn't call you here to discuss teamwork. I called you here because Pacific Fleet Command is planning operations that will require coordination capabilities beyond anything we've attempted. The invasion of the Philippines, the assault on Iwo Jima, eventually the invasion of Japan itself. Sarah felt the weight of implications settling around her. These were operations that would involve thousands of aircraft, hundreds of ships, and coordination challenges that would dwarf anything the Pacific Theater had seen. Sir, how can I assist with these operations? By accepting promotion to lieutenant and command of the new Advanced Tactical Coordination Division, you would be responsible for developing coordination procedures for operations involving multiple fleets, multiple nations, and multiple theaters of operation simultaneously. The offer was staggering. Lieutenant was a commissioned officer rank. A transition from enlisted to officer that typically required years of preparation and formal education. Command of an entire division meant responsibility for hundreds of personnel and operations affecting the entire Pacific War effort. Admiral, I'm honored by your confidence, but I'm not sure I have the qualifications for division command. Admiral Nimitz set down his report and looked directly at Sarah. Chief Chun, 6 months ago you were a night shift radio operator who saved 16 pilots through improvised coordination. Today, you're managing air traffic for half the Pacific Fleet. Your qualifications aren't found in any manual. They're demonstrated every day in this coordination center. Before Sarah could respond, a knock interrupted the meeting. Admiral Nimitz's aide announced the arrival of several visitors who had requested to attend this meeting. Jake Morrison entered first, now wearing the insignia of a major, followed by Danny Walsh, whose easy Oklahoma grin was unchanged despite the captain's bars on his uniform. Patricia Reeves had been promoted to lieutenant colonel, while Rebecca Martinez wore the distinctive wings of a chief transport pilot. Admiral, Jake Morrison said, we apologize for the interruption, but when we heard about Sarah's promotion consideration, we wanted to provide input. Proceed, Major Morrison. Sir, every pilot in the Pacific knows Chief Chun's reputation. When we're assigned to operations coordinated by her division, we know we're working with someone who understands not just procedures, but the human cost of every decision. That's worth more than any manual or training program. Danny Walsh, now commanding his own squadron, added his perspective. Admiral, 6 months ago, Sarah saved my life and the lives of 11 other pilots. Since then, her coordination work has probably saved hundreds more. The pilots she's coordinating don't just trust her procedures, they trust her judgment. Patricia Reeves, who had transitioned from training operations to combat missions, spoke with the authority of someone who had flown under both traditional and innovative coordination. Sir, Lieutenant Chun's coordination methods have become the standard we train to. Her ability to adapt procedures to changing tactical situations has revolutionized how we think about air support. Rebecca Martinez, whose transport operations now span the entire Pacific Theater, provided the practical perspective. Admiral, in 6 months of operations coordinated by Sarah's team, I've never had a mission delayed by coordination failures, never had unclear instructions, never had to second-guess tactical guidance. That level of competence is rare at any rank. Admiral Nimitz listened to each testimony, then looked back at Sarah. Lieutenant Chun, it appears your reputation precedes you. Do you accept command of the Advanced Tactical Coordination Division? Sarah looked around the room at pilots who had become more than radio voices, at an admiral whose strategic vision encompassed the entire Pacific War, at an opportunity to serve at a level she had never imagined possible. Yes, sir, I accept. The promotion ceremony was brief but significant. Admiral Nimitz administered the oath of commissioned officer. Jake Morrison pinned the lieutenant's bars on Sarah's uniform, and Danny Walsh presented her with a gift from all the pilots she had coordinated, a radio headset engraved with the call sign, Guardian Angel. Sarah, Danny said, every pilot who's worked with your coordination team knows that call sign. It represents someone who watches over us, who guides us home, who makes sure we don't get lost in the vastness of the Pacific. As the informal ceremony concluded and the pilots prepared to return to their various assignments, Jake Morrison approached Sarah privately. Lieutenant, there's something else. We've been talking with other pilots, and we want to establish a tradition. Every pilot who completes a tour in the Pacific Theater will receive training in advanced radio procedures. We want them to understand not just how to talk to coordination, but how coordination thinks, how decisions are made, what information helps and what information hinders. Jake, that's a remarkable idea. Understanding the coordination perspective would definitely improve pilot-controller communication. Sarah, we're not doing this just to improve communication. We're doing this because what you accomplished at Henderson Field proves that understanding multiple perspectives makes everyone more effective. A pilot who understands coordination becomes a better pilot. A coordinator who understands flying becomes a better coordinator. 6 months later, as Sarah stood in her division command center, coordinating the air support for the invasion of the Philippines, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from her father's electronics shop in San Francisco to this position of responsibility and authority. The Advanced Tactical Coordination Division now employed over 500 personnel, coordinated operations across 3 oceans, and had established procedures that would influence military aviation for decades to come. But the core principles remained unchanged from that night at Henderson Field. Listen carefully, think quickly, communicate clearly, and never forget that every decision affects real people in dangerous situations. Through her headset, Sarah heard the familiar sounds of aircraft requesting guidance, pilots reporting positions, and the constant background hum of radio waves carrying voices across thousands of miles of ocean. But now, instead of being the only person listening in the darkness, she was part of a coordinated network of professionals who shared her commitment to bringing everyone home safely. The quiet girl from San Francisco who had learned radio operation from her father had become Lieutenant Sarah Chun, guardian angel of the Pacific Theater. She had found her voice in the static of war and used it to guide not just 12 pilots, but thousands of others through the dangerous skies toward home. And in the vast electronic web of coordination that now spanned the Pacific, her voice continued to be the one that others counted on when everything went wrong and there was no one else to call. Nearly 2 years had passed since that pivotal night at Henderson Field, and Lieutenant Sarah Chun now found herself facing the most complex coordination challenge of the war. The invasion of Iwo Jima, codenamed Operation Detachment, required unprecedented coordination between naval aviation, Marine Corps air support, and Army Air Force bomber formations. The Advanced Tactical Coordination Division had grown into a sophisticated operation spanning 3 buildings at Pearl Harbor. Sarah's command center resembled something from science fiction: banks of radar screens, encrypted communication arrays, and plotting tables that tracked aircraft movements across half the Pacific Ocean. Her staff of 600 included former pilots, naval officers, and specialists in electronic warfare who had been recruited from universities across America. Lieutenant Chun, called Commander Jennifer Walsh, Danny's sister, who had joined the division after her brother's enthusiastic recommendations, were receiving priority transmissions from Task Force 58. Admiral Mitcher is requesting immediate coordination for a fighter sweep over the target area. Sarah moved to the primary coordination station, where a massive plotting board displayed the positions of over 800 aircraft preparing for the Iwo Jima assault. The complexity made her original coordination of Eagle Squadron seem like a training exercise. Commander Walsh, patch me through to Admiral Mitcher's flagship. We need to coordinate this sweep with Marine air support and long-range bomber formations. As Sarah established communication with Task Force 58, she reflected on how dramatically military coordination had evolved. The procedures she had improvised during that desperate night at Henderson Field had been refined, systematized, and expanded into doctrine that was now taught at military academies across the Allied nations. The conversation with Admiral Mitcher revealed the scope of modern naval aviation operations. Lieutenant Chun, we have 450 carrier-based aircraft preparing for the preliminary bombardment. I need coordination with land-based bomber formations to ensure we don't have friendly fire incidents over the target area. Admiral, understand. I'm coordinating with 20th Air Force to establish altitude separation and timing intervals. Your fighter sweeps will operate at 15,000 feet and below. Heavy bombers at 25,000 and above, with a buffer zone for tactical adjustments. What followed was a masterclass in large-scale coordination that drew on every lesson Sarah had learned since Henderson Field. She found herself simultaneously managing communications with carrier task forces, land-based bomber commands, marine, aviation units, and even submarine forces that would provide rescue operations for downed pilots. The scale was overwhelming. Over 1,200 aircraft operating in coordinated waves, supported by rescue vessels, weather reconnaissance planes, and electronic warfare units that jammed enemy communications. Yet the fundamental principles remained unchanged: clear communication, precise timing, and constant awareness that every decision affected real people in dangerous situations. "Guardian Angel, this is Able Squadron Leader," came a voice through Sarah's primary headset. She recognized the call sign system that had evolved from the nickname Danny Walsh had given her years earlier. "We're encountering heavier than expected anti-aircraft fire over the target. Request permission to alter the approach vector." "Able Leader, Guardian Angel. Approved for vector change to bearing 090. Be advised, Baker Squadron is operating in that sector at your altitude plus 500 feet. The coordination continued for 18 hours straight. Sarah found herself managing wave after wave of attacks, coordinating rescue operations for downed pilots, and adjusting tactical plans based on real-time intelligence from the battlefield. Her staff worked in shifts, but Sarah remained at the primary coordination station throughout the entire operation, unwilling to delegate the responsibility for decisions that could determine the success or failure of the assault. During a brief lull in operations, Colonel Marcus Johnson, her former radar operator who had been promoted and transferred to her division, approached with an intelligence report that would reshape the entire operation. "Lieutenant, we're intercepting Japanese communications, indicating they're preparing a major kamikaze attack. Over 200 aircraft launching from airfields on the mainland. Estimated time to target area, 4 hours." Sarah studied the intelligence report, her mind immediately shifting into the analytical mode her father had taught her years earlier. 200 kamikaze aircraft represented a threat unlike anything Allied forces had faced. Traditional defensive tactics assumed rational opponents who valued their own survival. Kamikaze pilots operated under completely different psychological parameters. "Marcus, what's the composition of our defensive coverage?" "We have approximately 300 fighters available for combat air patrol, but they're distributed across multiple task forces. Concentrating them for defense would leave our carrier groups vulnerable to submarine attack." Sarah realized she was facing a tactical problem that had no established solution. The coordination procedures she had developed were designed for conventional air combat, where both sides sought to achieve objectives while minimizing losses. Kamikaze tactics fundamentally altered the strategic equation. "Marcus, get me direct communication with Admiral Nimitz, Admiral Mitcher, and General Curtis LeMay. We need to coordinate a defensive strategy that involves all three services." What followed was the most complex military coordination of Sarah's career. She found herself facilitating tactical discussions between admirals and generals, coordinating defensive plans that spanned thousands of square miles, and developing real-time responses to intelligence that changed by the hour. The kamikaze attack, when it came, tested every coordination capability the Allied forces possessed. Sarah's division tracked the incoming formations on long-range radar, coordinated intercept missions by fighter squadrons from 6 different carrier groups, and managed rescue operations for pilots shot down during the defensive engagement. "Guardian Angel, this is Corsair Lead," reported Major Patricia Reeves, now commanding a fighter squadron based on USS Intrepid. "We're engaging the main kamikaze formation. Estimate 120 aircraft, flying in multiple waves." Corsair Lead. "Guardian Angel, you have support incoming from Hellcat squadrons off Essex and Bunker Hill. Maintain your intercept vector and prepare for coordinated attack on my signal." The air battle that followed would be remembered as one of the largest aerial engagements in Pacific theater history. Sarah coordinated the movements of over 400 Allied fighters against the kamikaze formations, managing communications that spanned dozens of ships and hundreds of aircraft simultaneously. Through her headset, she could hear the sounds of aerial combat, the sharp communications of pilots under fire, the controlled urgency of damage reports, the relief in voices reporting successful intercepts. Each voice represented a person whose life depended on clear coordination and precise tactical decisions. Guardian Angel, this is Rescue 7, called the pilot of a PBY Catalina flying boat. We have a visual on a downed pilot, Grid Square 77 Alpha, requesting fighter escort for pickup operation. Rescue 7, Guardian Angel. Escort is en route. Wildcat formation from Independence. Be advised, enemy aircraft may still be operating in that area. As the battle continued, Sarah found herself drawing on coordination techniques she had developed during 2 years of increasingly complex operations. The improvised procedures from Henderson Field had evolved into systematic methods for managing air battles, involving thousands of participants across hundreds of square miles. The final outcome exceeded all expectations. Allied fighters intercepted over 90% of the kamikaze formation, limiting damage to the invasion fleet while demonstrating the effectiveness of coordinated defense tactics. More importantly, the coordination procedures developed during the engagement would become standard doctrine for naval aviation operations. The announcement of Japan's surrender found Sarah in her command center, coordinating what would prove to be the final major air operations of the Pacific War. The Advanced Tactical Coordination Division had grown to over 800 personnel, with coordination centers established at bases from Australia to Alaska. Admiral Nimitz visited the coordination center personally to deliver the news. Ladies and gentlemen, the Emperor of Japan has announced his country's surrender. Effective immediately, all offensive operations are suspended. We are transitioning to occupation and peacekeeping coordination. The silence that followed was profound. After 4 years of coordinating combat operations, planning defensive strategies, and managing tactical responses to enemy actions, the Coordination Center would now focus on the complex logistics of military occupation and the massive task of redeploying forces across the Pacific. Lieutenant Chun, Admiral Nimitz said privately, I wanted to personally thank you for your service during this war. The coordination capabilities you developed have fundamentally changed how military aviation operates. Your influence will be felt for decades to come. Thank you, sir. But the credit belongs to everyone who served in the Coordination Division. We succeeded because we worked as a team. Lieutenant, modesty is admirable, but leadership requires recognition of achievement. You transformed military coordination from an administrative function into a tactical discipline. The procedures you developed will be taught at military academies. The coordination techniques you pioneered will influence aviation operations worldwide. As the war ended and Sarah began planning the transition from combat coordination to peacetime operations, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a night shift radio operator to the commander of the most advanced military coordination center in the world. The quiet girl from her father's electronics shop in San Francisco had become a pioneer in military aviation, a leader whose innovations would influence how nations coordinated their military forces for generations to come. She had found her voice in the static of war and used it not just to guide individual pilots home, but to shape the future of military coordination itself. And as peace settled over the Pacific, Sarah Chun knew that her most important work lay ahead, training the next generation of coordinators, developing coordination capabilities for the jet age, and ensuring that the lessons learned in the crucible of war would serve to protect lives in whatever conflicts the future might bring. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.